What's up, y'all? My name is Andrew Defy, a.k.a. the Gorilla Poet Laureate, a.k.a. the Hoodie God, a.k.a. Spittin' Quarantino, a.k.a. I wear my sunglasses indoors at night because my eyes are as sensitive as my heart is, y'all. And welcome to episode 25. That's right, we've hit another milestone here at Masked Up, your favorite health live streams, favorite health live stream. I don't know. All right. What I do know is that we've got another amazing edutainment experience for this half of the internet that tunes into this show every week. It is May. And that means Justin Timberlake memes and Star Wars jokes. It also means it is Mental Health Month. So we have a whole show for you surrounding mental health, what affects it, and what we can do to help ourselves and our kids stay as mentally healthy as possible while navigating this pandemic lovato. We are going to talk to Dr. Syra Madad, a nationally recognized epidemiologist who helped lead New York's COVID response. We'll also be talking to Children Now's Associate Director of Health Collaborations, Lishaun Francis, about how to best support the mental health of our youth in these unique times. All that, plus COVID California updates, the racism crisis, and the science behind how stress affects your mental health, starting now. Overall, COVID numbers in California are all trending downward. Bam, 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 bam. Congratulations, y'all. That's cases, deaths, and test positivity all down, which means ICU beds are up, and we are creeping farther and farther down the cases per 100K number and hovering right around 4 cases per 100K. So keep doing what you're doing. Consider going to get a vaccine if that is for you. If it's not for you at this point, please stay safe and take care of others with continued masking, hand washing, and distancing. And if you're still making up your mind, stay tuned. Asking medical professionals is what we do on this here show, and we've got some great ones coming up later. We do want to mention, because it's being talked about a lot, that children now make up 22% of COVID cases in the US, and that number is on the rise. Although we also want to acknowledge that that number is bound to go up as the number of cases in adults go down. That's how percentages work, y'all. This is something to be aware of, but not afraid of. COVID vaccines for kids are predicted to be out at different points within this calendar year, depending on age. Some are even in phase 3 testing, which means they're close to being done with clinical trials and certified for public use or not. The New York Times published an article this week where experts basically said achieving herd immunity against COVID-19 wasn't going to happen anytime soon because variants are moving too fast and we're vaccinating too slow. And I quote, "Scientists and public health experts say rather than making a long-promised exit, the virus will most likely become a manageable threat that will continue to circulate in the United States for years to come, still causing hospitalization and deaths, but in much smaller numbers." Y'all know we only have the most knowledgeable and exceptional guests on this show, and tonight is no different. We've got a renowned epidemiologist joining us tonight who helped lead New York City's COVID-19 efforts. You might recognize her from the Netflix docuseries Pandemic, How to Prevent an Outbreak, or the 2021 Discovery documentary, The Vaccine, Conquering COVID, or Fortune magazine's 40 Under 40 for healthcare. She is a thought leader known throughout the world of public health for her work in special pathogen preparedness. Y'all, we are so honored to bring you Dr. Syra Madad. Dr. Madad, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm fantastic. I'm getting to sit down and talk with you. So you led the public health response for New York City, the most populated city in the U.S. during the widespread global pandemic, and we all saw how wild it got out there. What was it like being a healthcare worker at such a difficult and pressing time?
Well, I'm one of the many individuals that's part of a very large team in New York City's public healthcare system that has been providing support and responding to the COVID-19 pandemic from the beginning. I started to track this pandemic, and before it was just a cluster of cases, December of 2019, and we started preparing New York City in January because we were trying to figure out Is this something that's going to affect, New York City, given we're a city, we're an international hub, and going through the epicenter and then the multiple surges that we've faced since then, it's been a moment where we realized that these are events that are greater than any one person, any one individual, any one government. Really shows how we need to come together, not just as a nation, but as a global society that we are, to conquer this. And as you're seeing now today, present day, the US is in a much different position than the rest of the world. And we're in a better position in terms of our rates of infection going dramatically down. In fact, over the last, a couple of weeks, we've been seeing almost a 27 to 30% decline in infection rates, and inversely, we're seeing an increase in vaccination rates, which is remarkable. You can't say that for the rest of the world, where you're seeing this is the worst part of the pandemic for many countries around the world. Let's just look at India, for example. What's happening today? Today, they clocked in over 400,000 cases, which is still a gross underestimate because testing is still very much lacking there. So it's more likely that they're probably seeing over 1 million cases a day. And if you go back to when this pandemic started, it took about 8 to 9 months for the world to clock in its first 1 million cases. And now here we are today, in one day, we are clocking in 1 million cases. So that shows you just how chaotic and how transmissible and deadly this disease is spreading today and what we're facing.
And you played a lead role in the Netflix docuseries Pandemic, How to Prevent an Outbreak, which was filmed way before COVID-19 even began and was chillingly accurate in its prediction of the pandemic. In this documentary series, you frequently stress the need for increased pandemic preparedness funding at a time when no one really wanted to listen. What should we be doing as a society to learn from our mistakes and prevent another outbreak in the future?
Well, there's a few things. And the first thing that I'll start off with is that we've had plenty of wake-up calls, not just here in the United States, but around the world. If you just take a trip down memory lane and the different outbreaks and epidemics and pandemics that we have responded to just in the past 10 years, you're looking at, for example, the Ebola epidemic in 2014, and we've had multiple different outbreaks of Ebola in West Africa ever since then. You're seeing the Zika pandemic. You're seeing just in New York City, we had a very large measles outbreak, a vaccine-preventable disease. So there were so many different infectious diseases, SARS, MERS, H1N1 that we can go back to, and all of these really should have served as a wake-up call. And it really, one of the big lessons that we should learn from this pandemic, and as we're looking at building back better and sustaining the gains, we need to change this cycle of panic and neglect. And what I mean by that is that if you look at how we responded to these epidemics and pandemics, whether it was SARS, or whether it was Ebola or Zika, we threw in so much money at that time for the public health and healthcare response. And when that threat dissipated or dissolved, we took away that funding. So there was no sustainment. So when we look at pandemic preparedness, and that's one of the things I was trying to highlight in the Netflix docuseries, is that it's an active process. You can't just say, I'm prepared for a pandemic, but not invest in any resources, time, effort, and have a process and infrastructure in place. Our entire pandemic strategy today has all been just in time. And what I mean by that is just in time will increase genomic surveillance. Just in time will build up a contact tracing workforce. Just in time will build vaccines. And that just in time is what makes us lose precious time. And that translates into more infections and more deaths and more hospitalization. So we need to pivot from this entire pandemic just-in-time strategy to a just-in-case approach. And a just-in-case approach looks at knowing that these events are inevitable. Epidemics are inevitable. Every year, on a given year, the World Health Organization, confirms at least one new, pretty deadly microbe. Then that's not even including the different outbreaks that they detect around the world in a given year. It could be hundreds. And so we live in a world where this is the reality. So in that just-in-case approach, you already have these manufacturing systems in place. You already have a workforce in place. You already have a good public health response that you can turn on in a minute and be able to rapidly respond. That is what we need. The last thing that I'll mention is so much of this has already been laid out for us. So to give you an example, the World Health Organization every year comes out with this priority list of different pathogens that we should be prepared for and invest in resources. So when we talk about, let's just say, vaccine development, and that's a huge investment, but a really good investment, because you're looking at what's playing out today and how vaccines are what's getting us out of this pandemic. So if we look at this World Health Organization blueprint that has, over 10 different pathogens that we should be investing in, this includes viral hemorrhagic fever, severe respiratory diseases, and many different infectious diseases. If we just invest $4 billion in having, basically pre-developed vaccines for them, then we would be saving millions of lives. And to give you a price tag on that, the COVID-19 pandemic since October of 2020, the interim price tag that has cost the United States is $16 trillion. So imagine if we just spend $4 billion in just making vaccines ahead of time for these pathogens instead of spending in response, hemorrhaging in response. That's not only saving lives, but it's saving the economy and the world from what we're facing today.
And I want to talk vaccines a little bit. For individuals who have been vaccinated, is there data yet on how long folks are protected? Will we need to get booster shots later or get a new vaccine every year, just like the flu? How is that looking right now?
So the vaccines that we have here in the United States that are FDA authorized are remarkable. They are extraordinary. And I'm not just saying it because I'm a public health official and I want to build confidence in COVID-19 vaccines. I am looking at the proof in the pudding, looking at real world results. So not only are these vaccines safe and effective, but you're also seeing that in playing out in real life with millions of people getting vaccinated, not just here in the United States, but around the world. You're seeing here in the US, vaccination or infection numbers dramatically dropping. As I mentioned, 30% decrease in overall infection rates and an increase in vaccination rates. And you're seeing many people being prevented from infection, hospitalization, and death. We often look at, and what the media often tries to portray is, the negative aspects of these are the number of people that have side effects, or these are the number of breakthrough cases. And I'm gonna take that I'll say that with a grain of salt, and we can get back to breakthrough cases in a moment. But they don't focus on how many lives vaccinations are actually saving. So if you look at during the height of the pandemic in January, we had thousands of deaths happening every single day. Vaccines are preventing people from getting infected, people from going to hospitals and requiring ICU level care and dying. So it's preventing so many deaths. And so if you're looking at real world data, let's just look at Israel and UK. You're seeing a remarkable impact of these vaccines happening. Now, getting to your point of, the longevity of the immune response. It's a bit complex to answer that question. So right now, based on the data that we have seen that, for example, Moderna and Pfizer has provided, you're seeing really good immune response and protection at least for 6 months. It's going to be greater than that for a couple of different reasons. And obviously, we're going to wait on data to give us more concrete answers. But I am very optimistic and hopeful for a couple of reasons. First, if you look at the immune response, it's a complex system. So it's not just about the antibody production that you are trying to, you're trying to measure, but it's also the memory cells that are being produced, like these T cells, that are really our long-term memory cells. So when you encounter this virus in the future, maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line, they may very well be able to detect it and mount a good immune response. And the second part is that, when we look at just generally other coronaviruses like SARS, you're seeing that people that were infected with SARS decades ago still have a good immune response because of these memory cells. And so that gives us an indication that these vaccines will probably provide really good long-term protection, but we just need more data to back that statement up. But we have a backup strategy, and it's always good to have a backup strategy, because the one thing we want to be prepared for is a curveball in this pandemic, and we've been thrown many different curveballs with the variants and so many other things. And so that backup strategy are these booster shots that are being developed by multiple different pharmaceutical companies. So we're not sure when and if we'll need these booster shots, but it's good to have it in the back pocket. And these booster shots are looking at future variants, right? So the variants that are circulating today, our vaccines are holding up. They're providing still really good protection, but we can't say that in the future, because while we have low levels of community transmission generally in the United States, you have raging transmission happening around the world, which is probably going to give rise to many different variants that we haven't even encountered yet. And so that's going to threaten our vaccine-induced immunity today. And that's where these booster shots will play a key role of if and when that does happen, we have a backup plan.
And while we're talking vaccines, you know, J&J had the whole thing about the clots. Is there a better or worse vaccine to take? Is there a hierarchy of vaccines for our viewers?
So the J&J pause certainly did put a bit of a damp on the overall vaccine rollout. But first, there's a couple of things that I'll mention. So the J&J vaccine is still a highly safe and effective vaccine, and the benefits greatly outweigh any of the risks associated with it. And so when you talk about the risk of blood clots and low platelets, or TTS that we often call it in medical terms, these are very rare events, basically 2 in a million, if you will. And in fact, I think the message should be that the risk of actually getting a blood clot through natural infection is much greater. So if you actually get COVID-19, your risk of experiencing a blood clot is much greater than you actually getting vaccinated and preventing, from getting infected and landing in the hospital. And the other thing is, when you look at vaccinations, it's helping in so many different ways, not just obviously preventing you from getting infected and landing in the hospital and potentially dying from it, but it's also protecting those around you and the community. So when you look at which vaccines are better, so first with the J&J vaccine, there is a warning that goes along with it for females under the age of 50. So that risk is more predominant in that age group. And so that's where you want to see if there's other vaccines offered to you, like Pfizer, Moderna. I would go with the other vaccines versus the J&J if you're in that risk population. That said, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are highly safe and effective. Haven't seen any of these safety signals. You're seeing millions of people get vaccinated with both of those Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. So they are really safe, really effective, and they're doing exactly what they were developed for, which is saving lives.
As cases are starting to go down in the US, there are more talks about life getting back to normal. Everybody's ready to go outside. What more needs to be done before we return to normal, and what precautions should we still be taking right now?
So I think the name of the game is risk reduction versus risk elimination. And what I mean by that is we're not going to eliminate COVID-19. I think it's just good to say that right up front. That we're going to be living with COVID-19 just like we live with many different infectious diseases like seasonal flu every year. But we would need to tamp down on transmission and prevent severe disease and prevent and mitigate severe effects of this virus from occurring. And the way to do that is vaccination, vaccination, vaccination. And you're seeing that play out today. And so looking at, COVID-19 and looking at the future of when we can go back to normal, when we can start lifting restrictions and going back to, the way that we were once socializing with one another, the key is looking at low levels of community transmission, which we're seeing now because of vaccinations, low levels of hospitalization and death, and continuing with these risk reduction measures. Humans are quite bad at risk calculus. So, the perceived risk versus a relative risk with a real risk that we're actually dealing with. So when we look at the risk of COVID-19, getting COVID-19 is terrible. So you want to obviously get vaccinated, but we're going to get to a point in the very near future where we're going to have low levels, as we're seeing, playing out today, where we're kind of starting on that cusp, where we can start to see life go back to normal. And if you're living in New York City, where I'm in New York, you're seeing the mayor made a huge announcement just today saying that New York City will open up July 1st. And the reason for that is because it's based on science and it's based on data, looking at the numbers of hospitalizations, cases, percent positivity, and looking at the vaccination rates. It's a good goal to show that by July 1st, hopefully we can get to a place where we will have low community transmission and more people protected in the community. And that's risk reduction. We're trying to reduce the risk, in the future and now. But as we look at today and moving forward, I think masks are something that are going to be part of the social norm. I think people are going to just feel comfortable wearing a mask moving forward. And I think things that will threaten our progress are variants. Certainly variants are the wild cards, and that can certainly affect our vaccine-induced immunity. So right now, the message has been consistent. If you haven't gotten vaccinated yet, certainly go ahead and get vaccinated, because all Americans over the age of 16 are now eligible. In fact, according to the Biden administration, over 90% of Americans live within 5 miles of a vaccine site. And so it's easier than ever to make an appointment and get vaccinated. And if you're living in New York City, most New Yorkers, about 99%, live within a mile of a site that's offering a COVID-19 vaccine. And so it's just making sure that you're making that decision to get vaccinated if you're able to, if you meet that age criteria. And if you don't, to continue with the COVID safe behaviors of making sure that you're not going to areas that are crowded or poorly ventilated spaces, because we do have community transmission that is ongoing right now. And so we want to continue to provide and abide by those COVID safe behaviors. Good answer to your question, but I hope I answered it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I have one last question, and it is the question that I ask everyone who comes on this show. Where is your joy coming from currently?
I love that question. I haven't gotten that. I haven't been asked that question. I think in all the interviews that I've done. So I find joy in a few things. First, I'm a mom of 3. I have a pandemic baby. I delivered my third. I have a baby girl, 2 boys and a girl. So my third child, I delivered her January of 2020. I went back to work a week later because of the pandemic. But my kids are certainly my joy. Fridays are something that I look forward to because we call it Fun Friday. It's something that I try to make sure that whatever my schedule is like, I try to cut it off by 5, 6 p.m. so we can have our movie night and enjoy ourselves. I recently took up gardening because this pandemic has had a huge toll on my mental health and general well-being. I haven't really taken time off since the pandemic started. Since I delivered my baby, it's really been nonstop. So I try to do that, and my husband's been, really, really supportive and has been amazing. He's been trying to, do more takeout so I don't have to cook or cooking himself. And I really, really enjoy cooking. So if you're on my Instagram feed, you're seeing that I constantly post pictures of food that I'm making or just in the kitchen. That's kind of my happy place. So I do a lot of that just to make myself kind of de-stress and understand that self-care is really important as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so, I mean, this may be the end of this interview, but I think we're going to have you back to talk gardening then, because I got my garden started in the pandemic too.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm new to it. I've been watching videos of how-tos, but I've had a couple of eggplants and bell peppers and things like that grow. So I am very happy about it. I'm very proud of myself. So.
And nothing tastes better than something that you grew yourself. There's something magical about that. Dr. Madad, thank you so much for joining us and your time and your energy and just everything that you do and everything that you are. And thank your family for letting us borrow you for the last year. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for your kind words.
May is Mental Health Month, and we wanted to break down a little bit of how our mental health and physical health are related and influenced by each other, and provide some tips and resources for self-care, especially when it comes to your mental health. One critical threat to both our mental and physical health is stress. Too much stress causes all kinds of conditions and complications in our bodies and our minds. Here's Ted Ed with a couple enlightening minutes on the science of stress.
Are you sleeping restlessly, feeling irritable or moody, forgetting little things, and feeling overwhelmed and isolated? Don't worry, we've all been there. You're probably just stressed out. Stress isn't always a bad thing. It can be handy for a burst of extra energy and focus, like when you're playing a competitive sport or have to speak in public. But when it's continuous, the kind most of us face day in and day out, it actually begins to change your brain. Chronic stress, like being overworked or having arguments at home, can affect brain size, its structure, and how it functions, right down to the level of your genes. Stress begins with something called the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, a series of interactions between endocrine glands in the brain and on the kidney, which controls your body's reaction to stress. When your brain detects a stressful situation, Your HPA axis is instantly activated and releases a hormone called cortisol, which primes your body for instant action. But high levels of cortisol over long periods of time wreak havoc on your brain. For example, chronic stress increases the activity level and number of neural connections in the amygdala, your brain's fear center. And as levels of cortisol rise, electric signals in your hippocampus, the part of the brain associated with learning, memories, and stress control, deteriorate. The hippocampus also inhibits the activity of the HPA axis, so when it weakens, so does your ability to control your stress. That's not all, though. Cortisol can literally cause your brain to shrink in size. Too much of it results in the loss of synaptic connections between neurons and the shrinking of your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that regulates behaviors like concentration, decision-making, judgment, and social interaction. It also leads to fewer new brain cells being made in the hippocampus. This means chronic stress might make it harder for you to learn and remember things, and also set the stage for more serious mental problems like depression and eventually Alzheimer's disease. The effects of stress may filter right down to your brain's DNA. An experiment showed that the amount of nurturing a mother rat provides its newborn baby plays a part in determining how that baby responds to stress later in life. The pups of nurturing moms turned out less sensitive to stress because their brains developed more cortisol receptors, which stick to cortisol and dampen the stress response. The pups of negligent moms had the opposite outcome, and so became more sensitive to stress throughout life. These are considered epigenetic changes, meaning that they affect which genes are expressed without directly changing the genetic code. And these changes can be reversed if the moms are swapped. But there's a surprising result. The epigenetic changes caused by one single mother rat were passed down to many generations of rats after her. In other words, the results of these actions were inheritable. It's not all bad news, though. There are many ways to reverse what cortisol does to your stressed brain. The most powerful weapons are exercise and meditation, which involves breathing deeply and being aware and focused on your surroundings. Both of these activities decrease your stress and increase the size of the hippocampus, thereby improving your memory. So don't feel defeated by the pressures of daily life. Get in control of your stress before it takes control of you.
So language is a big part of anything. And when it comes to mental health, there is little that is more helpful than learning terms to describe the feelings you are feeling. I've seen a couple articles lately that gave me some verbiage that I wanted to hand on to y'all. Languishing. It was a word I'd only read in old novels and never something I'd heard in the context of mental health. But as I read this article from the New York Times, it really touched on something that I myself had been really dealing with, and I think a lot of us are dealing with. See, therapists use a scale that ranges from depression to flourishing when it comes to rating mental health. Languishing is what happens in the middle of that spectrum. You're not flourishing, but you're not in depression. In this article, they called it the neglected middle child of mental health and the dominant emotion of 2021. Yo, it's a long article, so I won't read it all to you here, and there's a couple of them, but let me give you some highlights. Here's a quote. It wasn't burnout. We still had energy. It wasn't depression. We didn't feel hopeless. We just felt somewhat joyless and aimless. It turns out there's a name for that. Languishing. You don't have symptoms of mental illness, but you're not the picture of mental health either. You're not functioning at full capacity. Languishing dulls your motivation, disrupts your ability to focus, and triples the odds that you'll cut back on work. It appears to be more common than major depression, and in some ways, it may be a bigger risk factor for mental illness. Last spring, during the acute anguish of the pandemic, the most viral post in the history of Harvard Business Review was an article describing our collective discomfort as grief. Along with the loss of loved ones, we were mourning the loss of normalcy, grief. It gave us a familiar vocabulary to understand what had felt like an unfamiliar experience. Although we hadn't faced a pandemic before, most of us had faced loss. It helped us crystallize lessons from our own past resilience and gain confidence in our ability to face present adversity. We still have a lot to learn about what causes languishing and how to cure it, but naming it might be a first step. It could help defog our vision, giving us a clearer window into what had been a blurry experience. It could remind us that we aren't alone. Languishing is common and shared. So what can we do about it? A concept called flow may be an antidote to languishing. Flow is that elusive state of absorption in a meaningful challenge or a momentary bond where your sense of time, place, and self melts away. During the early days of the pandemic, the best predictor of well-being wasn't optimism or mindfulness, it was flow. People who became more immersed in their projects managed to avoid languishing and maintain their pre-pandemic happiness. This article recommends giving yourself some uninterrupted time. Clear the distractions and give yourself some room to focus. Focus on small goals. Something as small as a word game on your phone, or in my case, doing those damn dishes, can help by stretching your skills and heightening your resolve. In another article from the Times about flourishing, we get this quote from my Science of Wellbeing professor at Yale. First, how do you know if you're languishing, flourishing, or somewhere in between? Simply asking someone is an effective diagnostic tool, said psychology professor Lori Santos. Do you wake up ready to start your day, or would you rather go back to sleep? Do you have a sense of purpose, or do you find how you spend much of your day to be meaningless? You are kind of the expert on your own sense of flourishing, she said. The second article, titled The Other Side of Languishing is Flourishing, Here's How to Get There, offers this advice. Savor and celebrate small things. Get a gratitude practice going. Do 5 good deeds. Look for communities and connection. And now whether this means churches, car clubs, gun clubs, geocaching groups, Renaissance fairs, community comes in all shapes and sizes. She also recommends finding purpose in everyday routines. Things like working on a new skill or reaching out to thank the people you value in your life will go a long way. If you're feeling down, choose a small project. It could be as simple as cleaning the kitchen, or doing yard work, or even washing your pillowcases. Maybe you set a 10-minute timer and go for a short jog, or try a 1-minute meditation. Completing a simple, impactful task can build toward a sense of accomplishment. And the last tip they have is try something new. So there's some language and some tips around mental health that may be helpful if you find yourself in that place between depression and flourishing. And maybe we normalize languishing as an answer to how you're doing for a while. Languishing. Our next guest is the current Associate Director of Health Collaborations for Children Now. She is on the front lines of our babies' fights for well-being as they get back to school and define their new normals. We got children's mental health superhero Lishaun Francis joining us tonight, y'all. Miss Francis, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am fantastic. I get to talk to you. And we have a lot to talk about. So you currently serve as the Associate Director of Health Collaborations at Children Now, which advocates for the health and well-being of California children. What are the biggest health challenges that you are witnessing among California children today?
That's a great question. And honestly, I don't know if it's fair to just choose one, but I will talk about what I know. And that is the challenge of mental health for our young people in the state of California today. We know that California's children are suffering, some in silence, some not so silent. We know that we are seeing a huge increase in the emergency room visits for mental health issues right now for California kids. We also know that we have concerns about suicidality and the rate of suicide due to the isolation that COVID brought us. So we're having a lot of attention brought on to the issue of mental health, and rightfully so at this time.
And there's been a lot of extra challenges going on with it this past year. From COVID-19 and school closures to police brutality and the AAPI hate crimes. How have all of those things impacted children's mental health?
Yeah, so, I think the way I've been describing it is that all of this has compounded what children and youth were already going through, right? So, pre-COVID, our children and youth were dealing with discrimination and racism, right? And then COVID hit, and a new layer of overt racism was happening within our API community. We heard of students getting bullied at school because of the inaccurate allegations of somehow the API community being responsible for coronavirus. But what we also had was a situation where COVID did not allow for people to connect with one another in the usual ways that we would seek healing. So, for example, many of us who are part of disenfranchised communities really were able to seek healing in community settings, whether that is through your community center or through your church, or through your mosque. Everything was shut down. So, the biggest event when it came to police brutality last year was around George Floyd, and the usual spaces where you would seek refuge were no longer available to you. So it's not that these things are new, that racism and discrimination are new, it's that we were now compounded. Add to that the fact that COVID really put a financial strain on families, right? So people lost their jobs. They weren't losing their jobs, they were concerned about their health. Maybe they had to go into a grocery store and work every day. We already knew that Black and Brown youth were more likely to be concerned with housing, food insecurity, and those things that really impact one's socioeconomic status than their white counterparts. COVID exacerbated that, right? So COVID was this mechanism that really shined a light on problems that already existed and lit a fire to it. That's how I've been describing what's happening in this last year.
Mm. So what can we do to support our children during these emotionally challenging times?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think it depends on a lot of factors. But one thing that I've been really advocating for and pushing the state of California to do is think about, what are we going to do for families at this time? How are we going to support parents as they try to parent? How are we going to support students as they go back to school and in the classroom, right? And they just dealt with a really challenging year of social isolation and worry and fear. And don't forget, many students might have also experienced a death in the family due to COVID, right? A death that might not have ordinarily happened had it not been for the pandemic. So we really need to be having a system put in place that identifies students who are having trouble and providing services and supports to them.
So basically, we're fixing the environment and not the flower. See, in a recent webinar, you said when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. Number one, as a poet, I just want to say bars. What one policy change would you say would have the biggest impact on creating healthy environments for children in all communities?
So that's an unfair question. And the reason why it's an unfair question is because there isn't one thing, right? I think what a lot of our policymakers do is they try to latch on to like the sexy new policy of the week or of the year and the one thing. But remember, it took time to get us here. We built a system, and our system is built on a history of racial discrimination, right? A history of not supporting poor families. And we need time to actually dismantle a lot of those policies, and we need time to actually help people as we go through our next steps. So it's not just one thing, right? It's many things that we need to do. But I will say that generally as a rule, what I don't like to see is this ad hoc level of investment when it comes to supporting our children and youth, when it comes to supports and services. And what I mean by that is California has a tendency to invest in 10 different things as opposed to investing in, say, 2 or 3 and really sticking with those 2 or 3 and saying, you know what we're going to tackle? We're going to tackle X. we're going to tackle why, and we're going to put a lot of dollars behind those things. Instead, what we do is we have 100 different projects. Honestly, we have all of the programs that our public health officials and our mental health officials say that we need. We have some form of them in the state of California. What we don't have is, we don't have it, it's not statewide. We don't have robust investment, and every child doesn't have access to that program. But I bet you we have it.
Any programs that you want to highlight that you know about that are doing the work out here? I mean, we have half the internet watching right now. I'm just
Yeah, there are a lot of programs, and that's always a tricky issue, just because California's system is one that really gives counties a lot of flexibility to do the work and to really identify what's needed. So what I'll do is I'll highlight some of the statewide investments, right? And so some things that we've invested in are like the California Reducing Disparities Project. And that goal was really to reduce mental health disparities in communities of color. And we allowed those communities to decide how that money is going to be used in order to support their mental health, right? So that's not necessarily one program, but it's a project that California has been investing in that communities have really responded to, right? Our Mental Health Services Act and Oversight and Accountability Commission has really been investing in student mental health, right? And they have been really ensuring that schools and county behavioral health departments are able to form partnerships so that they can provide services on campus. Again, not statewide, not available to every child in every county throughout the state, but we do have some really cool opportunities of investment that we've already begun.
Yeah, I think it was like 18 counties out of all of the California counties have that program, but we're still looking at another 20 or so that don't.
Yeah, it's something like that, and it's more about just kind of funding and recent funding, and we want to get to a place where all of our counties and cities have such a structure in place, right? So that's what I call statewide-ness. We, while we want the state to invest, dollars that would add another 20, I think ideally every county would have such an MOU, and every county would have such an understanding where folks are working together. There are interagency agreements. From a public health standpoint, we know that when agencies work together, you have the best outcomes. And what I mean by that is it's not just Department of Mental Health working by themselves. They have to work with Department of Education, Child Services, et cetera. There has to be an idea that we are going to meet the child wherever they are, regardless of where they show up at whatever time.
We're talking about 360 degrees out here. And I love the concept of I'm a big building with and not for communities, and that's what you're talking about here. I'm gonna shift gears a little bit, just because we are in the middle of a pandemic still. And working on these vaccinations. And the FDA just announced that authorization for the Pfizer vaccine amongst children ages 12 to 15 is expected to arrive soon. What impact would this have on children's health and the pace at which children return to school?
Hopefully this means that we will get back to some kind of new normal. And I don't want to say normal because we're all very sensitive to the fact that things weren't great prior, but I will talk about a new normal. So hopefully this means that we'll get to a new normal very quickly. And we know that some districts are already moving forward with school reopening, and hopefully this allows parents and administrators to feel comfortable as they do their rollout.
So what would you say to any parents who have hesitation about vaccinating their children? And what would you say to teens who want to be vaccinated but can't get parental permission?
Speak to your pediatrician. That is what I would say. And honestly, these are medical decisions. Speak to your medical professionals. There are very few instances where you would rely on social media to make decisions for your child's health. If your child broke an arm, you wouldn't go to Facebook and see, what your Facebook friends say about this broken arm. So really, really reach out to your pediatrician, ask questions. They'll be patient with you. They'll have the answers and make an informed decision.
Absolutely. I was just on the wonderful world of Facebook yelling about how I don't come to my friends on Facebook for plumbing advice. I go to a plumber. I feel it's the same kind of argument there. So we are down to the last question, and it is a question that I ask everyone that comes on this show because I'm an expert joy hunter, and I have a feeling that a lot of y'all are too. Where are you finding your joy today?
Outside, in the outdoors. I'm spending a lot of time in the sun. It has been great weather here in the Bay Area. I have a hammock in my backyard. I'm spending a lot of time on it in between breaks. I am napping and I am finding peace and joy in the outdoors as it was intended. So I think that's great, and I'm really just enjoying the warmth these days.
You know, that hammock life, like the hammock is probably the best investment that I made over the last like year and a half. You know what I mean? And it was like I was like, oh, I'm doing something good for my health because I'm getting this vitamin D out here. You know what I mean? Like this is an investment in my health. So you know, y'all make sure you pick up a hammock.
Yes.
First convenience that you have.
Highly recommend.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything you want to tell the people while you got half the internet tuned in?
No, just talk to your doctor, ask questions, make an informed decision, and be safe. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Francis. We'll have to have you back on so we can give out hammocking tips to everyone.
Yes, thank you.
While mental health affects all of us, our Black and Brown family feel it especially heavy because they face the additional mental health effects of racism, microaggressions, and systemic inequality. Check this video out from NBC News on the toll of racism on Black Americans' physical and mental health.
A country emerging from protests of pain. After the killing of George Floyd,
I cannot breathe.
Viral moments of racial bias caught on tape.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
And the deadly shooting of Ahmaud Arbery. Incidents that are not just emotionally devastating, but also physically damaging to Black people.
Every police shooting of an unarmed Black person leads to worse mental health for the entire Black population in the state in which it occurred for the next 3 months.
Several studies show a possible association between perceived discrimination and mental and physical health. One study found that Black people who were stopped several times by police were 3 times more likely to exhibit symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and high levels of anxiety and stress. We had a candid discussion about the toll those experiences can take.
Here we are again seeing Black people, Black men especially, being killed in public. It's a spectacle.
Do you feel exhausted by the headlines?
And it's an exhaustion that should not be seen as an exaggeration. It's an exhaustion that should be seen as justified, and that there is a real and a true understanding of why it's there.
That exhaustion, the byproduct of racism that dates back centuries, from slavery to Jim Crow segregation. It's a history of oppression that still impacts Black communities today, especially when images of brutality serve as a reminder.
How does that stress manifest? What does that mean for the Black people in this country who are watching those videos?
It means that they have higher levels of mental health symptoms. It means they have more difficulty sleeping at night. It means that some of their biological systems are not functioning the way that they should.
Causing a collective pain, but behind it, there's still hope.
Moving forward, I think we can continue to tell the truth, and hopefully America looks at itself and doesn't like what it sees.
We have to make sure that Black people, Black babies, Black children are protected.
Hope for a better future and a healthier one.
And with that, we are at the end of our Masked Up Mental Health May edition. I'm Andrew Defy. As always, shout out and big thanks to Netta, Suchita, Allison, and the rest of the Masked Up Show crew. You are the greatest. If y'all were a children's book, you'd be the Billy Goats Gruff. You know what I'm saying? like we always do at this time, from all of us to all of you, like Mozzie said, health is wealth, and I need my bag. Covered faces don't get cases, and health don't come from a pharmacy. Y'all, till next time, stay masked up. Or, like, get a vaccine and you won't have to. I'm just saying.